I'd like to take a moment now and talk to you a little bit about the way TSRI engages with their customers. Our transformation process has been delivered over the last 5 to 7 years by a unique project engagement process that we've created that allows us to bust up our engagement processes into really 2 tiers, a pre-project tier and a project execution tier. Let's talk a little bit about the pre-project tier. During that project, we will use by a secure website. You folks will provide us with your code, and once we get your source code, we'll transform it or create a transformation blueprint and an application blueprint for your source code. We'll create a software proposal based around the artifacts that we had, and then we'll have a free transformation or application blueprint preview on a WebEx or a remote web meeting to show you what the transformed software application looked like, to show you all the UML diagrams and documentation that came out of the transformation process. And in the end results, we'll provide you with a detailed proposal of what it would take to get your job done and allow you to make a decision whether or not to transform your application with TSRI. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit about the 4-phase execution process that we have. In phase 1, we call that the assessment phase. During the assessment phase, we'll set up our tool to achieve 100% automated transformation. We'll create an application blueprint to allow us to begin the process of understanding what the current application looks like. Using that application blueprint, we'll also create a first cut transformation of the source code. And we'll begin a process with that application blueprint of identifying all the external and internal dependencies that need to be identified and dealt with during the course of the transformation. And we'll create a detailed target architecture design plan, which will output transformation specifications that we'll use to feed the second phase. Now, the second phase is going to be the transformation phase. During this transformation phase, now that we have the Janus Studio toolset set up, we'll transform your code into a point where it will compile and link and is ready to be tested. We'll also resolve all the external dependencies that were identified, both system and application level dependencies during the first phase. And we'll transform your database into a functionally equivalent a relational database structure. And at this point, at the conclusion of phase 2, we're ready to perform an equivalency test to make sure that the application is now 100% functionally equivalent to the original application that you provided to us. Now we'll move into the third phase, which we call our refactoring phase. During the refactoring phase, we'll actually take the functionally equivalent application that we just tested, and we'll take and create a refactoring plan. During the refactoring plan, we'll identify the things that the client wants to have done during refactoring to improve the application's maintainability without changing the functionality of the application at all. Some of the things we do during refactoring is automated refactoring, which is the transformation of the application to automatically remove all dead and redundant code, to consolidate any duplicate code or cut and paste redundant code that's within the application, and to start applying standard name standardizations and standard coding standards that were provided to us during the beginning of the project. We can also perform a whole host of custom refactorings and semi-automated refactorings during this process. And at the conclusion of this process, we'll go through another equivalency test to make sure that the application still functions and operates the same way it did at the conclusion of the second phase, except for now it's way more performant. Now it has a much smaller code base to maintain, and it's really a much more tightly wound application and going to be much easier to maintain and modify in the future. Now, at the conclusion of that third phase of the application, we're going to move into what we call the final phase of the application. This is very unique to TSRI. Because during this process, we've developed a 100% automated transformation capability to take your application from start to finish in a very automated manner. Now, when we get to the final phase, we'll go back to the customer and ask them to provide us with a copy of the code that they've been maintaining and modifying throughout the entire project. And when we get to the end of the project, we get the final set of code. We'll run that through the Janus Studio toolset and end up with a final code base that identifies all the differences in the application from the one that we just tested, automatically run those deltas that we identified through phases 1, 2, and 3 very quickly, and within a week to 10 days, rather than a code freeze of years, you'll have your application that we'll provide back to you, tested, ready to go, final documentation, and ready for you to put back into service.